In 1805, Hans Christian Andersen was born in Odense, a small Danish town where poverty shaped everyday life. His family did not start with safety or certainty. Money stayed tight, choices stayed limited, and the future felt decided before it arrived. But the child still absorbed everything around him. Early on, hardship did more than restrict him. It trained him to notice, to listen, and to look for escape in the only place that stayed opened. That escape often came through his parents. They did not hand him wealth or influence, but they gave him stories. In a home where practical needs never stopped, imagination still found a way to matter. The tales he heard helped him make sense of disappointment and fear. And they offered a different kind of power, the idea that a life could change. Those early narratives did not erase his reality. They quietly challenged it. So Andersen grew up with two forces pulling at him at the same time. Odense kept reminding him what he lacked, and his parents' storytelling kept suggesting what might be possible. That tension became a spark. A poor child learned to build richer worlds in his mind, not as a game, but as a need. And long before he wrote anything down, the first seeds of his future work already took root in that struggle. As a teenager, Andersen left Odense with a simple plan. He would reach Copenhagen and make himself an artist. He had no secure job waiting, no powerful name to open doors, only the belief that talent would be noticed if he got close enough to the stage. The move turned hope into pressure. In the capital, everything cost more, and every mistake mattered. He tried to push into the world of theatre and music, aiming for any role that could keep him there. But Copenhagen did not reward effort on its own. Auditions did not turn into stable work, and small chances often ended as quickly as they appeared. He asked for support. He searched for patrons. He kept returning to the same hard fact, wanting it was not the same as belonging. Each setback forced a new calculation. If he could not win acceptance through performance, he still needed a way to stay in the city long enough to grow. The capital measured him against trained voices, polished manners, and people who already knew the rules. Andersen learned those rules the slow way, through rejection and waiting. Ambition carried him to Copenhagen. It did not carry him through it. The stage did not reward Andersen's hunger for applause. His voice and manners felt wrong for the polished world he wanted to enter, and rejection followed rejection. But those failures also made him visible. A few well-placed people noticed the stubborn boy who refused to go home, and they decided he was worth rescuing. Money appeared, introductions opened doors, and the dream shifted direction. He stopped chasing quick success and aimed for training. School sounded like salvation, but it also came with rules he had never lived by. He entered classrooms older than the other students, with gaps in his learning that could not be hidden for long. Teachers demanded structure, grammar, spelling, Latin, steady reading, steady work. His writing, once poured out as pure feeling, now faced correction, line by line. The change hurt. It also gave him tools. Talent began turning into craft. The patrons expected results, and Andersen felt the pressure every day. He learned to endure embarrassment, to rewrite instead of sulk, to accept that discipline mattered as much as imagination. At times, the new system nearly broke his confidence because it measured him against standards he had never been taught. Yet it also pulled him into the world he wanted. By the end of this schooling, he no longer looked like a wandering outsider. He started to look like a writer in formation. In the 1820s, Andersen moved from being a student with promise to a writer who tested himself in public. He wrote constantly, then began sending work out to be judged by people who did not know him personally. Rejection still happened, but each attempt sharpened him. He learned what held attention on the page, and he learned what failed once it left his desk. When his writing finally appeared in print, it changed the stakes overnight. A private ambition became a public fact. Readers could now decide if his voice mattered, and critics could dismiss him in ink. But the publication also proved something he needed to know. He was not only improving in school, he was becoming marketable. His words could travel without him. That first real breakthrough brought attention, and attention brought pressure. Andersen had to show it was not a one-time success. He kept publishing, pushing himself to be clearer, more controlled, more memorable. Each printed piece acted like a small step up in Danish cultural life. By the end of the decade, he had evidence in his hands. He could succeed in print. In the early 1830s, he did not stay put and enjoy his new recognition. He left Denmark and started moving through Europe for months at a time. The trips sounded like a reward, but they also tested him. He depended on timetables, letters of introduction, and the kindness of people he barely knew. Each border changed the rules. Each city demanded that he adapted fast. On the road, he met strangers who spoke in rhythms he did not grow up with. He listened closely, picked up phrases, and learned how different cultures explained the same feelings. He watched how class and power looked from place to place, not just back home. Travel widened his cast of characters. It also sharpened his sense of being an outsider. That tension stayed useful. It kept him writing. The landscapes mattered, but mainly because they changed his thinking. Mountains, rivers, and unfamiliar streets forced him to measure distance, danger, and hope in new ways. He took notes and shaped scenes in his head while he moved. The more he travelled, the more he collected. Accents, habits, fears, small acts of kindness. He returned with a larger map of human life and more stories waiting to be told. By 1835, Andersen had already proven he could write for the public, but he still searched for a form that belonged only to him. He turned to fairy tales, a kind of story many adults treated as simple nursery material. He published his first collections that year and made a clear bet: short stories, plain language, and endings that did not always feel safe. It sounded familiar. It landed differently. Andersen borrowed old folk motifs people already knew: magic helpers, tests, talking animals, sudden reversals, but he reshaped them from the inside. He did not retell tales like museum pieces. He let them carry his own feelings: shame, hope, envy, pride, and the hunger to be seen. The narrator voice mattered too. It felt close, like someone confessing and joking at the same time, guiding the listener without hiding behind tradition. That mix created something new in Danish print. The stories stayed easy to follow, but they carried modern emotions and a personal point of view, as if the author stood in the room. Readers could recognize the old patterns, then get surprised by the tone and the sting. This was not just entertainment for children. It was a new way to speak about ordinary life through wonder, and it widened what literature could do. Once the first collections reached readers, the next step happened almost automatically. Other countries wanted them. Publishers looked for quick successes, and translators started carrying the tales across borders. A story that had felt rooted in one small language suddenly moved into many. Each new version introduced Andersen to people who had never heard his name, and with every translation, his audience expanded beyond Denmark. Translation did more than spread the work. It tested it. Some details shifted, some phrases softened, and some humour changed shape to fit local tastes. But the core held. The emotions stayed clear, even when the words changed. Readers in different places recognized the same fears and hopes, the same wish to be seen and valued. The tales proved they could travel without losing their meaning. As the readership widened, Andersen's name started to function like a label. It signaled a certain kind of imagination, Danish in its roots, but not locked inside Denmark. The stories carried a small country's voice into larger conversations, and they did it without needing grand settings or famous heroes. What mattered was the human feeling underneath. That was what made the world keep reading. In the middle of the 1800s, he wrote as if the fairy tale had no ceiling. The stories kept arriving, one after another, and they carried more weight than people expected from that label. He returned again and again to one question: who belonged and who stayed outside? He took simple plots and pushed them toward complicated feelings. The result felt familiar, but it hit harder. These landmark tales focused on identity, not as a lesson, but as a wound. Characters searched for a name, a place, a face that matched how they felt inside. And often they did not find it quickly or at all. Loneliness stopped being a side effect and became the engine of the story. Even when a tale ended gently, it passed through longing first. That pattern changed how readers measured a children's story. With this run of work, he turned the fairy tale into serious literature without stripping away wonder. Adults recognized themselves in the same pages that children loved because the emotions stayed plain and true. He wrote about being overlooked, misunderstood, and desperate to be seen, and he made those feelings feel universal. The tales spread with a new kind of respect. They did not just entertain, they stayed with people. In his later years, Andersen no longer needed to prove himself. Across Europe, his name already carried weight, and invitations kept coming from courts, salons, and literary circles that treated him like a living landmark. People wanted the man, not just the books. Honours and public praise followed, and with each ceremony, the message became clearer. The outsider from Odense had become a symbol of the age. But the same fame that opened doors also set a pace his body no longer handled easily. Travel, once his engine, started to cost him more each time. He still moved when he could, but the journeys shortened, the recoveries slowed, and illnesses interrupted plans that used to run smoothly. He remained visible, yet the freedom to roam began to narrow. Recognition expanded, his world shrank. Creation changed, too. New work came less steadily, not from lack of ideas, but from fatigue and fragile health that broke long stretches of concentration. He leaned more on reputation built over decades, and the public watched him closely, as if each appearance might be the last. The constant motion that once fed his imagination eased into caution and rest. An era of continual travel and new stories reached its natural end. Long after Andersen's lifetime, his stories kept moving. They passed from Danish pages into countless languages, then into cheap editions, school readers, and bedtime routines. A tale that once depended on one writer's voice now travelled without him, carried by publishers, teachers, and parents. Each new printing widened the circle. The result felt simple. People who never heard of Odense still grew up knowing the same plots. Then the stories changed vehicles. Film and television adapted them, not as careful museum pieces, but as living material that could be reshaped for new audiences. Animators simplified endings. Directors darkened themes, and studios turned small moral fables into mass entertainment. The titles became reference points, the characters became symbols, and certain scenes became shared memory. The tales worked because they stayed recognizable even when they shifted form. Modern retellings pushed the cycle further. Writers rewrote the plots from different angles, questioned the old lessons, and placed the same struggles into new settings. Some versions aimed at children, others aimed at adults, but the emotional engine remained, wanting to belong, fearing rejection, paying a price for a dream. That reach marked the distance travelled. It stood far from the poverty of Odense, where the first hunger for stories once began.